Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second of our series in the presentation of Women Adventurers. As I mentioned last week, we're celebrating Women's History Month, and the theme for this year's Women's History Month is Celebrating Women Who Tell Our Stories. There's an African term for storyteller or keeper of the lineage or descendants, and it's griot, which is spelled G-R-I-O-T, but pronounced griot. I'm pleased to introduce today's griot, Agnes Ngoma Leslie. Dr. Agnes Ngoma Leslie is a master lecturer and outreach director at the Center for African Studies here at the University of Florida. She obtained a PhD in political science from the University of Florida. She teaches courses in African studies with a specialization in women and politics and China and African relations, which is very timely. She's the editor of Teach Africa, a publication which promotes the teaching of Africa. She's edited and published more than 20 editions of Teach Africa, Taking Africa to the Classroom publications. She's been a recipient of a Fulbright Award to Zambia from 2015 to 2017. She's president of the United Nations Association Gainesville chapter and vice president of Welcoming Gainesville in Alachua County. And we're so pleased to have Agnes Ngoma Leslie today. Here she is. Thank you.
Okay, let me get it shared. Okay, you're ready.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for having me. With the tradition of talking about women and women's history, today I'm going to talk about Queen Zinga of Angola, an African female strategist and liberator of our people from 1581, depending on how you look at it. Some people say she was born 1581, some say 1583 to December 1663. And mostly I'm going to focus on her impact on Angola and her people. But before I do that, I wanted to actually also celebrate other women who've actually making an impact on the continent. And right now, today, as we speak, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, is actually in Tanzania. And she has already been to Ghana, she's going to Tanzania, and she's going to go to Zambia, which is where I'm from. So it's really a very timely time to actually have this discussion. But I wanted to also emphasize that Vice President Kamala Harris is going to meet a current president now, female president of Tanzania, President Samia Suluhu Hassan. And she is the president of Tanzania. And I wanted to make sure that even before we celebrate the person that I'm going to talk to you about now, to recognize that actually Africa has had, at least 6 female presidents, the first one being Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and Mauritius Vice President Amina Gurib. She's no longer president, these are no longer president, but I want to make sure we recognize them as part of Black, Women's History Month. Malawi has had a president too, Joyce Banda, and Central African Republic, has also had a president, Catherine Samba Panza, and also currently, we still have another female president actually in Ethiopia. Saleh Work Zewde, she's actually Ethiopia's first president, female president, and she's current. So we have 2 current female presidents in Africa right now. And you might ask the question, how did African countries do that when other countries like the United States have not had that? And this will lead actually to my presentation mostly because of matriarchal societies. And I'll explain that in a little bit, because of religion also, which does not confine leadership to males, but women actually have been leaders of their countries in religion as well. The other reason that we have is really post-conflict societies, such as Rwanda and South Africa, Rwanda has the highest number of women in Congress right now. More than 60% of women are actually in Congress right now. And South Africa has like 45%. And this is explained by the quota system, which actually has been introduced in those countries. But also because of strong women's movements, which has ushered in and emphasized the role of women and the fact that you cannot develop totally, completely without having women in equal positions of power. But the other reason that I talked to you about was matriarchy. And we're going to see this in the presentation that I'm going to talk about today. Matriarchy is really explained as a society in which females, especially mothers and other women, actually have the central roles of political leadership, moral authority, and control of property. And we'll see that in the presentation that I'm going to give today. This is opposed to political centralization, where there's just male domination. This is patriarchal oriented. So matriarchy is seen as a way that actually has ushered in these women of power in these different positions. Okay, so the person I'm going to talk to you about, Queen Zinga of Angola. She's well-known, popular African. She's a conqueror, strategist, fighter, and diplomat. She has all these things and more. And she is derived from Angola, which is right here, and surrounded by these countries. I'm from Zambia, right here, and these countries, Namibia and Democratic Republic of Congo. The important thing to note here is the emphasis on Angola, Brazil, and Portugal. The fact that this country was actually colonized by Angola. But the person we're going to meet today fought against Angolan colonization of her country for many, many years. So just a brief history of Angola, which is a current country right now, is a country in southwestern Africa. The country's name derives from the word Angola, Ngola, which means king. And Zinga was also called Ngola. Angola was colonized by the Portuguese after a big struggle with people like Queen Zinga until its independence in 1975. Angola, as we speak right now, is a country very rich in natural resources, but especially oil. It's amongst the top highest oil producing countries in Africa right now. It ranks like second or third after Nigeria. So now to the topic at hand. So Zinga's footsteps, these are the hills of Mpungo and Dongo, the stones, huge stones of Mpungo and Dongo in Angola. In these big stones, there's some what looks like huge footprints. And people say these footprints belong to Queen Zinga. Of course, it's not true. They do not. But this is how she is seen to be of so much power. Because she's supposed to have made such a big, important mark on the people and on the country of Angola, these footprints, which are really prehistoric, and they may not even belong, they don't belong to a human being. They don't belong to a human being. But people say they are the footprints of Queen Zinga. They are not. So Zinga, you may actually have seen the name Zinga. Sometimes it's variously called Njinga, spelled like that, Nzinga. Queen Zinga is supposed to, like I said, it's supposed to be prehistoric. It's not really. She was born around 1581. She was called Nzinga because when she was born, there's a story that when she was born, she could have died because, the umbilical cord was wrapped around her neck. But quickly, her father removed it, and it was also removed medically and everything. but Nzinga means twist because of the cord around her neck. So Queen Nzinga really is known as the leader, the queen of Ambundu. Ambundu is really the people of Ambundu, these people who speak Mbundu. That's the language. Of two really regions, Ndongo and Matamba, from 1624 to 1663, because she also controlled another region of Matamba from 1631 to 1663. These are located in present-day northern Angola. In real life, really, like I said, she was not really historic. In real life, really, this is a picture of her as an African. But most images you will find, these are like paintings that they actually drew of her at that time during her reign. This is actually, I'll end with something like that. This is like the most that they put up, in terms of memorizing her. So when we think about the area that I'm going to talk about, this is Angola right here, right? But we are talking about Matamba here, and we're talking about these areas here. Ndongo, you see Ndongo here, and Matamba. So to see that they were actually real places that actually she controlled. And at times she also controlled, oh my goodness. I need to go back. At times she actually controlled, what have I done now? Okay, no, I'm trying to use this. Sometimes she actually controlled this area as well. She grew in firm, so you can actually see, this is actually the northern part of Angola right here, the actual country as it is right now. So she was born in a royal family. Her father became the leader of Ndongo, by the time she was 10 years old. She was the daughter of Angola. Like I said, Angola was a king, which translates as a king. And her mother was Kengela Kakombe. She had a brother, linearly, she had a brother who actually assumed the kingdom after her father died. But to take things back, the father saw from a young age, like from the time she was 10 years old, he recognized the leadership qualities that she had. So she was trained militarily. She was trained also in diplomatic training. She received all these things. And she had a way, in her community of really being seen as a leader. She was seen from the beginning as a true leader. That although her brother assumed the kingdom, he did not have the ability to govern. He destroyed things, also when he actually took over, there was an issue of him being controlling and not really doing enough for the people. But also, he recognized that his sister was better educated diplomatically and militarily than he was. So the people also looked to her for leadership. So, it was like in this community, they saw that this person can govern, but also this person can actually take care of us. This was also a time when the Portuguese were coming in, they were enslaving Africans, and they were trying to take over Angola. And the brother quickly saw that actually she could be the one who could deal with the Portuguese better. She could actually sit down with them and talk to them as a strategist, as a diplomat. She could actually do that. And the people actually say to her, this is a person that we see who can lead us, who can actually, keep us safe. And so from the beginning, she was able to take on those roles. She was able to travel long distances and communicate and strategize on behalf of the people. Of course, Nzinga could have said, this is too much of a burden for me, a young person, when she started off to be able to do that. But she was expected, she saw that she had the courage and the ability to do that. And that's what you see sometimes commonly among women, like even the person that I talked to you about in terms of Central African Republic, the people approached her and said, the country is not doing well. We want you to actually lead us. In Liberia, for instance, Ellen Sirleaf, Johnson, the country was really down to the ashes. And people said, we need somebody who's going to be really take care of the country. And that's why she actually won the election to be able to do that. So coming back to her, she actually decided, well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to form an army and I'm going to work with people around me to get rid of this colonization by the Portuguese. So she had these qualities, to defend herself, but also the people saw in her the fact that she was assertive. She could control her conversation with the people. She could meet with the governor of the Portuguese governor to Angola. So what is known, when you see most of the pictures of Queen Zinga, is really how she actually had a meeting one time with the Portuguese governor. The people actually saw that actually they prepared her, with singing the African way and to meet the Portuguese governor. And what was interesting was that when she actually arrived, this is a very historic picture, that you see. When she arrived to meet with the Portuguese governor, to humiliate her, the Portuguese governor removed all the chairs from the room except his own and just left a mat for her there so that she could be seen to be in an inferior position. But before she could even do anything, this is the accounts that we have, a human actually decided our queen is not going to be put down. So the human actually went down like this so that she could actually control the conversation and be able to speak with the governor on an equal footing. And so this is one of this is, when you look up Queen Zinga, you're actually going to see that. So she arrived there, and then there was a human chair, to put her there. And, during that conversation, she was assertive. She controlled the conversation, although the Portuguese governor thought that he was going to do that. And I should add that actually she spoke Portuguese among her other talents. And the governor de Souza was clearly outmatched. And he was clearly outmatched. And the thing is, the governor asked for the return of Portuguese prisoners because before this exchange, her army had actually captured some Portuguese prisoners. And the governor said, can she release those prisoners? And she said, not until you've released all the Africans that you've taken to Brazil and brought them back. So you can imagine the governor was like, well, this won't go anywhere. And so she was able to hold on to that. So Zinga agreed to exchange with the soldiers, provided, that all the people were brought back. But they actually had a deal, whereby they agreed to move away from their area, to withdraw its army, and, she agreed finally to return some of those people to prison. So these were just some of the strategies that she actually used to be able to hold back and to keep in touch with herself, but also to control the situation, for the people there. So one of the things that she did, because the Portuguese and other people were actually bringing about missionary work like Christianity and everything, she decided to become a Christian. Not necessarily because she looked down upon her own religion, but because it put her on the same par as the Portuguese. And because she could use that to her advantage. She could build schools, she could do a lot of things to strengthen the links between her community and the Portuguese community. she was actually more political than religious. She looked at the things like, I am going to, if we are going to exist here, the Portuguese could easily come in and run us out. But for us to actually coexist, some of the things that we have to do is really buy into some of the things that they are doing. So she did that. And also, note that she also picked a name so that she could be seen when she's negotiating. She's not just known as Ngola Zinga, which means Queen Zinga, but she picked a name, Dona Ana de Souza, to strengthen links with the Portuguese governor. And strange enough, or interestingly enough, the Portuguese governor was called de Souza. So, it was interesting that she actually took that name as a baptism, how you get baptized and you take a Christian name. And this is what she did. Beyond that, there were other areas, in Angola, which were not part of her group, like the Jaga, who were seen to be warlike. They were different from her group. But she formed alliances with them to make sure she was trying to be peaceful, to safeguard her position, to safeguard her community, Matamba and Gola, so that actually this could, she formed alliances with some people who were seen to be really like these people are warlike. How do you do that? She even married one of them because, to pacify them and to get them to their side, she would be able to do that. So sometimes you seem like, well, you went too far to this side, but she's saying, I want to make sure that my country is not destroyed. And there were several times that the Portuguese could have outrun them, or the Jaga could have outrun them, but she made sure that everything was kept together. So she formed alliances, like I said, with Angola nation. She had to form alliances and eliminate many enemies. There were many enemies because everyone was trying to carve out a path for themselves, and she actually did that. The Portuguese, faced the legends at that time that, she refused to cooperate with them. She even had a formation with the Dutch at one time to make sure that she was strengthened and her community was strengthened and she could fight against them. And we have to remember here that the time here, the Portuguese were very interested in getting Africans as slaves to try to move them. And Zinga attacked them to free her people. She formed these alliances, she formed this army, which she led herself. She was not just one of the person who said, go fight here, go fight. No, Zinga is known as a fighter, as a strategist, as a diplomat who did all this together. So there were many times that there were actually people who were caught and were trying to be moved to Portugal and everything. And her army intervened to be able to get them. So there were these youths and quilombos that she formed, for instance. To bolster Matamba's martial power, Zinga offered sanctuary for people who were running away from enslavement. If they ran away from enslavement, she had them, in a different space, safe for them, and then, move them to make a military wing. Instead of just keeping them there like that, they became part of the military wing, which was known as Quilombo, in which these youth, they actually renounced ties at that time just so that they could concentrate on being raised in these militias. So these were like another form of military rule that she actually had. So what she's known for, like when I go back to that area, the stones where you have the beginning, like they say these are her finger footprints and everything, was the kind of training that she has. She had a guerrilla army, which meant that she would be seen here with her army and disappear quickly and move to different places. So she would be moving in different So her army wasn't stationary in one area. There were pockets of them in different areas. She would move them constantly. They would be constantly moving. And, and so the Portuguese never really knew where they were in most cases. She kept the Portuguese at bay, trying to actually do that all the time. Later on, you know, uh, many years later, just before independence, these groups, like the people who were fighting the Portuguese, took on some of the strategies that she took because she was so skilled at that, herself militarily. Remember, she was trained by her father, she was trained by others in diplomacy and military training. So this really kept the Portuguese at bay, and most times, and the thing is, the Portuguese were so scared to hear her name that every time her name was pronounced, they would run the other way. Really, because they just felt this is not a person. And sometimes they just said, oh, she's going to eat you up. They came up with ways like that, like she's a cannibal, she's going to eat you up, just because she was so strategic and effective at what she was doing. This is really how she actually led the country. She was a military strategist, even past 60 years old. She was still fighting. She was doing that. She led the warriors herself. It's not like she was actually somewhere and just leading them. No. And besides, when you think about it, the Portuguese had more superior armament. They had superior armament, but she had whatever that she could use, she would actually engage them. Sometimes she would defeat the Portuguese and get some of the armaments that she had and use them to their advantage. So the result of her struggle was one country, Ndongo and Matamba. Although she's known that she actually ruled Ndongo and Matamba, she is actually seen as one country, in the north of Angola. She didn't settle down until after 75 years old, when you think about it, and assured that the country was at peace. Of course, the Portuguese, there were times where she lost the war. She didn't win all the time, but she kept the fight, and she kept fighting and fighting for so long. So this is a picture, a modern representation of Queen Zinga and Ndongo preparing to confront the Portuguese armies. This is actually showing that they have a different strategy. But there she is on a horse and everything. And there the Portuguese, very controlled and organized, coming in to attack them. They did not always win. Like I said, they did not always win. But this is like a recent representation of what actually they would look like. The important thing is that she was able to get people across different regions. It wasn't just that she just got a few people. In the end, she has thousands and thousands of people from different regions, from Matamba and Ndongo, and getting the people. And what shocked people was that how can you get people who are so different? How can you get people who are warlike? How can you get people who don't believe in this cause to believe in your cause? She had one response to them. I do not want to see my country ruined. I don't want to see my country drop down to ashes. All these are my children. All these are my people. This is a matriarchal value that she had. These are my people, and this is how I want to make sure that I don't fight. And this is what unites African women in terms of their values when they went to war, these matriarchal principles that we are fighting for that. So she's seen as a mother of Angola. Angola, last part of Angola means queen or king, but she's seen as the mother of Angola because no matter what, actually she's seen like that. But, beyond Angola, if you look at queens of Africa, you're going to see Queen Zinga. You're going to see the pronunciation may be different. It's going to be Njinga, Nzinga, or everything. In Africa, when you look up her name, you're going to see Queen Zinga as a person, a warrior who actually fought not just for Angola, but for African countries as well. She's remembered as the mother of Angola, the fighter of negotiations. Her wit in negotiation is something that actually has come out a lot of times. People have written of her, how she was able to fight, but not just fight with arms, but fight with words. She could fight with words to an extent that actually most people did not understand. But also her brilliant military tactics. She was just able to change tactics as she went along. It wasn't like she had the firm tactics that she used all the time, but she changed them. She was able to actually adapt to the situation, adapt to the environment, and be able to do that. That's why you see in those mountains, you see the footprints, because she was able to run through different spaces and be able to engage that. So one thing that we have to remember in the period of 104 years after her rule, 104 years after her death in 1663, queens ruled for at least 80 of them, 80 of those years. Queens of Angola ruled for at least 80 of those years. That's a major impact that she made on her people. But when you look back, when you see the writings in terms of Queen Zinga, the pictures that we see, so much legendary work has been produced about her life. From as far back as 1689, 1632, a French Jesuit, people have written accounts of her in the way that they encountered her. For instance, there was a Jesuit person, a missionary, who actually lived in her compound as a as a missionary. He lived in the compound because he believed in what actually she believed in. And he was one of those who was able to write one of the first legendary accounts in 1689 from his own point of view. There were some people who actually saw her from the opposing side, and they were writing the opposing side as a fierce person that if you encountered her, you're in trouble. You're able to do that and everything. They were able to do that. But there were also accounts written, later on, putting things together in terms of the research that people have found. How she impacted the different areas, how she impacted the Dongo, how she impacted the people speaking different countries, how she married different people, and how she had different camps. She had different camps of men and women, where she actually led these people into training, military training. And these different camps have different accounts of what Queen Zinga would do. How she fought and how she failed sometimes. But when she failed, she didn't stay down. How she got back and said, we're going to continue tomorrow to do this. And how at the age of 75, she was still able to get people together to do more things. And people are like, well, aren't we tired of doing this? She's like, no, we're just beginning now. We are just getting started. So in the contemporary times, for instance, there are books, poems, and lately movies, depicting her life. Some of you may have seen Netflix series related to that because of the impact that she has had in terms of her life. But let me speak a little bit about her legacy. So, when you go to Rwanda, for instance, if you go to Angola, a street in Angola is named after her. And the statue, I've already shown you, the major statue there, actually built in her honor. But a major street is named after her, and a statue of her was placed in one of the Cagnes, an impressive square in 2002, dedicated by the former president of Angola, to celebrate this 27th anniversary of independence. So when they celebrate independence in Angola, the first name that is going to be mentioned is Queen Zinga. She is the mother of the nation. She is the mother who actually brought about the country, who kept the country together. Otherwise, the country would be disintegrated, as we know it now. But many Angolan women also choose to be married near the statue because they feel that this empowers them. They feel the centrality. I mean, can you imagine this? They feel the centrality. They feel that Queen Zinga is the person. Without Queen Zinga, they wouldn't be there. So people would be married actually near the statue, to be able to make sure that she is a part of them. But also, I want to mention the fact that when you meet Angolan women, they actually have fought the battle. They've been engaged in the army. They are engaged as police women. They are engaged in the government. They are engaged in public and private sector. In terms of private sector, they are fearless. You find some of the richest women in Angola, women doing everything that they can do because they feel that they've been motivated. They feel that they've been born into this situation because of Zinga. They say that if Zinga could do it, we have no choice but to do it. And so you see women just doing a lot of things. I mean, when I was growing up, I remember listening to songs, hearing, Zinga and Zinga, and it didn't even, to me, it didn't make sense then. I was just thinking, well, Zinga is just another name, maybe like Mary or, a name that they actually, but, now, I understand it very, there are lots of songs in, Angolan tradition, which actually just promote her and who she was. So on 24th December 2000, the National Reserve Bank actually issued a coin in tribute to Zinga in recognition of her role to defend self-determination and cultural identity of our people. So they are, this is like a coin, this is money, which is actually issued in terms of her. So it is important to see that in the 16th, 17th century, she's continuing to have this impact on the people. So let me just describe some of the matriarchal values because I started with that in terms of what we see in African situation, African cultural setting. And this is Nzinga's matriarchal principles, how they actually motivated her to fight and to do what she wanted to do. She's the mother of the nation. So in African society, she saw herself, she could have said no to actually, having that big role point, but she saw herself as a mother of a nation, the mother of everybody else. This is the role that you see people like Helen Sirleaf Johnson taking up, related, people like Joyce, President Joyce of Malawi, who when she took over the country, and she found there was a plane, a presidential plane, but Malawi being a poor country, she said, why should I have a presidential plane when my country is so poor? Let's sell it and pay off some of our debts, and I will hop on a commercial plane. That's a matriarchal value. This is saying my comfort and my security doesn't come first. This is the matriarchal value that we see in Queen Zinga. The ideology of motherhood. The ideology of motherhood in African society is really saying the whole nation is I am the mother of the whole nation. You see it in rulers like in Ghana, for instance. When the British were coming to try and invade Ghana and said, I am going to fight. I am going to fight until I'm captured. Nothing else matters by my country. And she was actually caught by after fighting for years and years, the British caught her and actually moved her to Seychelles because she was such a threat. This is the threat that we see in Queen Zinga, a person who was able to say, I am the protector of the nation. There's nothing I can do. My body doesn't mean anything, but I am the protector of the nation. She is a peace negotiator. She goes in, even knowing very well that the governor of Angola is perhaps better placed in some ways than she is, but herself, she felt she was better placed because this is her land. and this is her people. It doesn't matter what he has. It doesn't matter what ammunition he has. She is better placed because these are people. And she commanded the highest respect, both from the Angolans and the Portuguese. They were afraid of her. There was nothing that they could do about her, but there was such fear. And when you read accounts from the Portuguese side, sometimes you'll laugh because you feel like you are not dealing with a human being. Like you're dealing with somebody who actually was, so fierce and everything. Yes, fierce she was. She could use a word to be fierce. But, she was a human being nonetheless, but very caring for her people. And for the Angolans, the respect is that she is the one that actually formed their nation and put it together. And the respect that she has, I have a little book here. I can show it to you. It is actually a real book, like this. She is read and revered at all levels. This has just been published like last year, but when you see it, it's about Queen Zinga and how she is revered and everything, and her father and and what he did. But the important thing that I wanted to end with this is that the culture and her history continues to be brought back to all levels. From the 17th century to now, people are reading about Queen Zinga. And now this is a book that is actually read even here in the United States by kids to know about women and to know about their roles and their positions and how they were not just, how fearless they were and the roles that they played in the community. So given, Women's History Month, today is the last one, I wanted to end with this to say that, her impact continues now even more than even the 16th century because people are seeing this and younger people are seeing themselves in Queen Zinga. As they read this book, they're empowered to say, if she could do it, what can we do as well? So I want to end there and invite you to have more questions. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. So, yes.
Does anyone have any questions?
I just enjoyed it so much, your lecture. But I'd like to ask you, could you tell us a little bit about her family life?
Her family life?
Yes.
Yes. So, like I said at the beginning, her family life, that's a very good question. Thank you. So she was one of three sisters. There were two other sisters who later on took on names like Lady Barbara, Lady, So she had two sisters. And she had one brother who actually, like I said, messed up. But after she actually retired, her sister is the one who took over from her. One of her sisters took over from her. So it was a very close family. She also had one child. She had one son who died early on in life, so she couldn't pass on the royalty to him. But she had two sisters, and at the time of her death, like I said, the other sister took over her reign. Yes. Thank you for that question. Yes. About my background. Okay, thank you for asking that. So I am from Zambia, a country which is actually close to that. And my father worked for the mines. He was a manager in the mines. And, he worked for the mines for some time and then moved from the Copper Belt to Lusaka, where currently my family is, and opened some businesses there. And so I grew up in Lusaka, Zambia, and I was there until '89, where when I got, married my husband is American, and we moved here in 1989. I have two sons, two wonderful sons, and I also teach at the University of Florida. Yes.
Okay. I was wondering when you say I saw the book about her life for children.
Yes.
Do you think it would be read in the schools under the present governor of this state?
So, very good question. It's a harmless book of, you know, you know, you know. So, what I work for the Center for African Studies, and we bought these books for people who took part in our summer institute, and we give them as books that they can actually read to people in their classrooms, and they can actually read for themselves. Is, you know, a book that promotes, you know, like I said, women, African, and the story is harmless, but your response is just as good as mine. I don't know what you think. It's a harmless book, but we don't know, right? We don't, it may be off the list, but we don't know. Yes. Yes. Yes.
When we were in Namibia, we went to the Ostasha Pan,
Yes.
and we were warned, and they had signs everywhere about the landmines. Did they ever clean all that up? Do you know?
You know, landmines is a very tricky thing, as you know. Cleaning them, you know, takes a long time. Here, in many places, even after you think you've cleaned them, they'll still come up, and then you have to employ all kinds of ways of doing it. So I wouldn't say yes, but I think it's a continuous process. Even in Angola, you know, yes. That's still there. Exactly. 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 Exactly my point. So when you have that kind of situation, it takes forever. Even when you employ the best methods to do that, there will be some things that are left somewhere. So no, and I'm not an expert on that, but what I know and I've read is that it takes forever to do that. Yeah, and your response is really right on the button. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
This isn't special with women, but I'm wondering about the Chinese influence in Namibia now, as far as doing infrastructure in the country. Are they a big presence?
Do you, what you think, what was the question? Yes, 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 yes.
Are they a big presence?
A huge presence. They are the Chinese, IT China Africa relations. The Chinese are a huge presence right now. And I should say, you know, in the last 3 months, there have been 18 US officials going to African countries in the last 18 months. I just showed you a picture of the Vice President Kamala Harris being, the Secretary, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was in Zambia, just a few months back. The First Lady Jill Biden was in Namibia, as well as Kenya and another country. It's Chinese presence is there because Chinese has been devoted to putting infrastructure in African countries. In my own country, in Zambia, there's tons and tons of infrastructure built by the Chinese. So the United States has been sort of absent for some time now. So now, in December, the United States invited all the African leaders to Washington, D.C. to talk about restarting the button with African countries. And so there's now this push to try and do that because, every time you read, like today, like I said, the vice president is in Tanzania. Tomorrow she'll be in Zambia. Now the United States is trying to play catch up to what China is doing. But China has done so much in terms of infrastructure that it'll be hard for the United States to catch up. And of course, the United States is talking about democracy, promoting democratic values, and education, entrepreneurship, and everything. But besides that, you have to provide some kind of development. And China has really done so much. If you arrive in Zambia today, you're arriving at the airport, brand new airport built by the Chinese. You're going to drive on roads built by the Chinese. You're going to you'll find airports, you'll find hospitals built by the Chinese. The African Union headquarters was built by the Chinese in Addis Ababa. There's, the rail line between Kenya and, some parts of in Kenya and Ethiopia has been built by the Chinese. There's so much. So when you go there to try and play catch up now, you have to do more for you to catch up to the Chinese. So your question about the Chinese in Namibia is very relevant. Right now, this is what the administration is dealing with. This is why we've seen 18 top diplomats in the last 3 months going to African countries to talk about debts, to talk about these things. But China has been there for some time now. So it's a difficult catch up to do. Yeah. But there is a role for the United States to play in African countries, because it doesn't have to choose either or. African countries also, can work with the United States, and they are. That's why it's choosing to go to countries like, Zambia, Ghana, Tanzania, where democracy is actually thriving. But it's more than democracy. There has to be development oriented.
Would you be able to give another lecture on Swaziland?
Me?
Uh-huh.
No, next week, actually, I'm giving, you'll be bored to death with me. No, next week I'm actually talking about the Kenyan woman who actually built, planted trees and her impact related to that. Yes. No, I'm not talking about Swaziland. I'm going to talk about Wangari Maathai. Yes, I'm going to talk about Wangari Maathai next.
And on that note, I think we'll finish up. And thank you so much, Agnes, for your presentation.
Thank you for having me. Oh, I see. Yes. You know what? Yes, it makes a difference, right?